what's happening in our world right now, the current feeling in the world right now, specifically in the area of police brutality and minorities, specifically black and brown people. And in the last month now, we've had the deaths of George Floyd and Rayshard Brooks, both at the hands of police. Both stories completely unique in and of themselves. Both stories and both moments in time captured on video. Both problematic on multiple levels. The end results were still the same: police taking the lives of black men. And many have tried to use the term. It's not a white thing or white versus black, but it's a everybody versus the police, which is problematic as a statement on its own. There have been it's everybody versus racism, which really should be the case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, I mean, I think we can all agree that everybody should be against racism, right?
Yeah.
But the idea of so my question for you guys is, right now in Atlanta, just read this online right now. Both police officers who were involved in the shooting and the death of Mr. Brooks have turned themselves in. At the same time, in certain sections of Atlanta, Georgia, police officers aren't responding to calls. I was saying earlier that what Atlanta should do is then say, okay, well, then we're not going to do any crimes. And kind of be like, if you're not going to call them, we're just going to behave for 24 hours, right? Kind of like, we don't need you. But like that's, and right now there's been contention between black people, brown people, and police for as long as I've been alive, and longer than that. In light of this conversation about defunding, demilitarizing, reforming, and the idea of abolishing as a topic, that's not a topic that we are condoning. You have not heard that on this show, but that's a topic that's out there. How do we start bringing improvements between people of color, people who have been marginalized by the police and police? And let me say this to you before I turn over the question to Tim. One of the things I've heard a lot of people say, and guys, you've probably heard this too, is I know really good, godly police officers. Right. We've probably all heard that. I know really good godly police officers.
What does that mean exactly? I don't know.
And Bart's statement of I don't know what that means. Today I rewatched the death of the murder of George Floyd. I was on Twitter and I watched as a police officer. This time I wasn't paying attention to the police officer, Officer Chauvin on Mr. Floyd's neck. I was paying attention to the police officer who was standing and blocking him from the crowd. And I was thinking to myself, what's more important, loyalty to your uniform or doing the right thing? What's more important, standing up for what's right and saying, dude, you've done too much, knowing that you're going to lose friends, you're going to you might lose your job because people don't respect you, or covering it up and being a part of this contingent who are then going to say, we're going to go on strike for this, we're going to get angry because of this, and then have this idea of this blue live sort of thing. This idea of how we bridge the gap between people who have been marginalized and the police is a real thing, because on one hand, there are people who are good, but sometimes those people who are good stand in the way of dealing with the people who have done really, 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 really bad things. Adam, then Tim.
Yeah, I just want to respond really quickly and then yield it to Tim. I think, Chris, the problem, and we'll get to this in terms of where we can see changes begin, but the problem is intrinsically the training of the police, in which those other cops actually think that they're doing the right thing. I was reading a whole bunch of stuff on this, but one of the things that I read that absolutely baffled me and blew my mind was there's a police in somewhere in California who was saying that there was multiple training officers that told him, I'd rather be judged by 12 than carried by 6. And so what that means is essentially I'd rather be judged by a jury of 12 people on my actions than be caught out dead in the streets, be carried by whoever it is, in a casket away. And the thing is that from the day that these people enroll into policing, fundamentally they are taught that the covering of people, of the boys in blue, is actually the right thing. It's not just this is what we do. This is your morality now. So Tim, I'm going to yield it to you, but I think we have to understand the mindset of police officers. And I'm going to touch on that a little bit later, but we have to come at it from both sides.
It's looking at it, the first thing that comes into mind is the idea of change. When we're thinking of change, it's something that really, I'm going to throw out some $2 words here. There are two types of change. There is technical change and there is adaptive change. Technical change is like changing the tires on your car, which is one of those things that you look at and go, oh yeah, that's pretty easy. Adaptive change is changing how you drive. And the struggle with the relationship between people of color and the police, and I know it's definitely something that we've all experienced within the black community itself, is that even if we defund the police, even if we demilitarize, it's one of those things that when we look at it as a whole from the get-go, the community itself has never trusted the police. Mm-hmm. And
That's
so
facts.
it's one of those things that if there is to be any change, there needs to be the adaptive change, which is the harder change of working to be able to build that trust between communities of color, particularly in this situation, black people and the police, to be able to look and interact with someone that is a carrier or is enforcing the law and trusting that they themselves are working for the betterment of society in which I am an equal and an important member of. Mm-hmm. And it's something that when we look at it, if all we're ever going to do is change the tires on how we enforce the police, we are going to be running through tires incredibly quickly all the time.
It's good.
And it's something that at the end of the day, I would say for us as a Western society, it requires some level of change to build the trust for us to be able to understand, okay, they're driving differently now. And so I can trust them behind the steering wheel of the law.
Yeah. I don't think, honestly, my own personal opinion is I don't think we're ever going to be able to reconcile police relationships with the public. Yep. As Tim said, there's been mistrust for way too long. Gary Potter of Eastern Kentucky University does a detailed write-up in Time magazine, actually featured him a few years ago. But he talks about how in 1704 that the police system that we know began in the South. It went from taking care of policing slaves to actually becoming an institution that still continued to pester the people and enforce segregation, even though things were beginning to change. In the same article, it talks about in 1838 that the first policing in the North began in Boston. And it was really more, when I read it, it kind of looks like a special constable or a armed security guard to protect the merchants from being robbed, just to enforce some of the things that they needed to there. But we understand that just when you look at those numbers, that's hundreds of years now, even more than that, where there are just issue after issue after issue after issue and so much distrust. When I think about my own personal experience, when I look at an officer, I have to remind myself consciously that they are there for me. And even if they're not, I have to convince myself that that is the actual fact. I think as long as they look the way that they look, they're armed to the teeth, all right? In Canada, at least, because we don't have the ability to carry. So they're overarmed. They're intimidating. They flex. They let you know that they are there. They let you know that they are present. And I'm not saying that all of them do that intentionally to be harmful, but it is the case. There is a little bit of bully footing. I grew up in the Peel region, right? And they prided themselves on that. Our uniforms don't match what else is going on. We're willing to take that fine. We are going to stand and do what we ought to do to make you stay in line. And just that idea of policing. We know people like that. We have parents like that. We have family members like that. We have employers like that who are always just constantly watching you do what you're going to do, waiting for you to mess up, even antagonizing you to mess up. And I just don't know if we're ever going to be able to bridge that gap. I think it's not my opinion. I don't really want to vote this, but getting rid of the system to build a new one might be the only way that we actually ever get to where we want to be.
Calvin.
Yeah.
So, oh no, go Reem. You got something to say there, Reem?
You know what? Go ahead.
Or with
Go ahead,
Andrew.
go ahead.
Someone go ahead and say something.
I don't know if you can really get rid of the system. The only reason I say that, and you know, in a perfect world, I think you could get rid of the system and start all over. But when you say you're going to get rid of the system, what are you going to replace it with? And who's going to be in charge of replacing that system?
I have an idea.
Because
I have an idea.
hold on.
I have an idea. The people who should replace it is the House of Common. I think the 10 of us.
Can we get a little back?
Andrew Jones for police chief, Commissioner
Jones.
Jones.
I think
Hot takes gonna get the world burned down.
Comments below, if you think the House of Commons should take over,
I'll need that stress.
and
listen.
the police.
Nope, not
we would be.
Just say so in the
We
comments
would
below.
be the
Stephen
most
could be a sergeant.
handsome people ever
That's
assembled
negative.
to run a police department. I'm just saying. Sorry, Andrew.
But here's because you say who's gonna make the new new world order? Who's gonna then? Is it gonna be worse? And who's going to take over until that system is in place? You know it's going to be the National Guard or the military or whatever the case, which will end up being worse than the police being there. The military.
I don't know. I think
the National Guard.
I think
Way worse.
If you take away the weapons from the police, right? You take the weapons that they don't need away. You take away the militarization of it. How many situations happen in the city of Toronto where the military would ever need to be called? Truthfully, in the neighborhoods that they feel like they need to be strapped up.
Exactly.
But what I'm saying is, if you totally dismantle the police until you build back up, something is going to have to take its place.
Yeah, but Andrew, no change in society is overnight like that. Like we're not. This isn't a proposition of tomorrow the police are done. Hand in your badge and your gun. You're going to jail, right? Like.
Right. No.
And
that's not what I'm saying either. I'm just saying like if we really want to see what people are crying for and looking at a system for 200-300 years that has consistently been broken and failed, how many more years do you continue to make incremental changes the opposite way of where society wants it to go?
But with who we have in charge right now, the people we have in place to dismantle it and then bring it back to new, do you think that can actually take place? We would
it'll look the same.
Destroy
As far as the U.S. goes, there's no way possible. Maybe here in Canada.
Exactly. We would have to destroy everything and start back from the beginning of government. We would have to destroy all of government to then get the right people in place to build everything back up.
I mean,
yeah, I agree with you.
I hear what you're saying, but again, I think it starts with government. The United States government over the last 20, 30 years, since 1997, sent $7 billion worth of military equipment to police forces around the United States. And that started under Clinton. So maybe we need to stop that program first and foremost.
Right.
Because there's no need, like I've said before, there's no need for police forces to have tanks and stuff like that. Now, like I've said, I agree that police should have the necessary defense. You know, they should have the latest technology to defend themselves. But they don't need offense, military style. They don't need machine guns. They don't need that stuff to be able to, in the interest of public safety, keep everything safe. I think that's where it starts. But I agree with you, Jonesy, because eventually it'll just end up being the same, regardless of what you replace it with.
Stefan, though, the problem and what you're saying there, and I hear what you're saying, but the issue is that's the exact argument that the police use, right? They're saying, we want change, we want this in our society, but the thing is we also need the proper things we need the proper equipment to protect ourselves, to defend ourselves. And it's this exact rhetoric that perpetuates the system that needs to be torn down. And so this is the thing, is that like, we're all saying I think
all saying the same
here-
thing.
No, we're not all saying the same thing. I'm with Cal in terms of abolishing. I'm not actually on the same side. I'm not on any of these things in terms of. I think defunding is actually is progress toward abolishing of police. But the reality is that like there's legitimate plans in place in terms of what a society could look like with a police-less society, and essentially like this is put forth by Angela Davis. She's she's a legendary activist and thinker, and I'm sure you guys all know who she is. But anyway, Angela Davis she's big on policing as well as the prison system, and she's like, man, if we keep pushing for strategies strategies that aim to punish and that aim to suppress people, then we never actually get to where we're going, and we actually have to fundamentally start to think about this differently. And that's the problem, is that the people who are actually controlling the rhetoric of this, you hear Donald Trump get up there, and I want to use him as an example because he's like law and order. Those are Nixon's words, where Nixon is talking about the war on drugs and escalating violence in the streets, stop and frisk, and all these different things. All of these things are pushing us toward the society that we don't want. I'm with you, Cal.
But that's what I'm saying. When it comes to abolishing, you can't abolish unless you start straight from the very top.
100%.
If you don't, but we're talking at a police level, and I'm saying we can't just do it at a police level. We can't just defund and abolish the police level. We have to abolish the whole government and start back from the bottom and build up.
I'm not so sure about that. I think that there are ways to do it.
What?
I agree with Jonesy. Here's the thing. I agree with both of you guys. I definitely agree that it has to be abolished. If you look at the system, there's nothing that we're going to be able to do to correct it. Again, you said from 1704, I believe, the time that you said. That's a lot of time. So to correct all that's been going on for that many years, that's not going to, doesn't matter what we do, we're never going to be able to correct. It's never going to be able to correct itself. But on the flip side, to correct it, you're going to have to abolish the entire system, in my humble opinion, because you got to understand, like, if you look at, even we were talking about Mark Saunders the other day, who hired him? The mayor hires him. Who hires the mayor? Like, the whole system.
And he's subject to the police service board.
And he's subject to the police service board. So you literally have to tear down the whole thing in order to bring about that change. Does change need to happen? Absolutely. But is change the only way that change is going to happen? Probably going to come from abolishing, like real change. It's probably the case, but then we got to abolish the entire system. Now we're talking a whole.
No, okay. All right, I'm gonna. I know Adam, you got. I know Adam, you got to take. I know you do.
Come on,
I can. I've allowed you guys. I've allowed you guys.
You've been very benevolent, moderator.
I have been benevolent.
We're sorry. Yes, sorry. We're sorry. We're sorry.
Before we transition into, so you guys have already started talking a little bit about how the change has begun. I'm going to turn it over to Jason, and then we'll continue on the conversation. But I need to break up the trifecta of a couple of you guys. My man, Steeler City, Jason, fun guy. Take it away. Share your thoughts, my brother.
Yeah, I mean, like, so there has to be something, and it has to stop at the top. But if you think about the whole, for instance, the whole U.S., just that whole system, that whole executive branch, where you're talking about the president, and for instance, jails are privatized in the States.
Mm-hmm.
So, and for example, I guess, so, I mean, maybe you guys at some point can educate me on how systems are here in Canada, but so they're privatized, so people are making money. It's a whole system. Now, obviously, America is the richest country in the world, but how come America has such a hard issue with drugs? Well, yeah, China, but no. U.S. is still there, but China's coming close. But anyway, to make a long story short.
It's very American of you.
No, it's real.
Let's check it out right now.
But I mean, there's all these systems, guys. There's all these systems, all these issues that are going on, and you're right. I mean, there has to be something from the top. But the problem is, in reality, is do some people want to really change? I mean, I'm gonna just say spiritual wickedness in high places. Now, obviously, I'm not saying everybody who's in these high positions. I'm not saying they're all bad. There's some great people, but I mean, the change has to start at the top. People have to be sincere about it. Even when Obama was in office, everyone's happy, was excited, but there's only so much that he even could do. So, I mean, everybody has to play their part. And it starts with us, with other people. If everybody plays their part, at least we can help and save some people.
Young Buck O'Shea, what you got? How we change this thing?
Yeah, I think it, and like this is where it sucks to say, but man, you gotta tear that thing down. You gotta tear that thing down, and this is where it sucks to say, because I have some great friends who are police officers. I have family members who are police officers, but the reality is that this is not a position where you can make a mistake, where you are killing someone's life and then expect nothing to happen. Like, the reality is, yes, there are great police officers. We can't emphasize that enough, but they're working for a system, whether they know it or not, that is not set up for a certain group of people to prosper. And the reality is, if they, man, this is going to sound bad, but they got to get their heads out of their butts and realize that that's a reality that they're working for. And it sucks. Yeah, you might lose your job. Yeah, you might have to take a seat, but for the greater good, prove to me that you deserve that job, is basically where this change happens. You gotta strip everything down, and you gotta, and it's not gonna happen overnight. It's not gonna happen in a year, but you gotta start, like, you got to start at the high places. You got to start, okay, cool, let's take this person out, because when the high officer in the RCMP comes out and says, no, there's no systematic racism in our establishment, that shows me that you are blind to that. You don't deserve that position, because you're not objectively looking at your own system, your own group of brothers, your own gang, and saying, man, where are we falling short? That shows me that you're not about change. And
Right.
Adam, you're gonna like this. In a Brooklyn Nine-Nine episode, okay?
Hollywood.
There's
It's not even a primetime show.
There's a part, and there's an episode where Captain Raymond Holt is looking at being the commish. And you look at the other guys and you look at their pitch, and their pitch is, all right, let's just continue to go forward. Let's remain the course. And that's all it's been, even though you have people that are out here shouting. They're screaming for help. They're pleading, they're begging for this reform, for this new structure. And everybody that they place in, everyone that they specifically pluck into those positions, is all about maintaining the course. And it's not about challenging their own selves. And this is, I think, the biggest change that can happen, is that mentality of, first of all, we actually need real accountability for police officers. We need truthful, honest accountability, and we need themselves to be accountable for themselves. Like, there's nothing wrong with you going, man, we're not doing something right. My officers who sign an oath, who plead an oath, are not doing anything right, and challenging them and getting them the help that they need, the help that they honestly deserve, and the teaching, the equipment to properly assess and handle these situations. And that's not being given to them.
Reem's next. My bad. My bad.
All right. No, it's all good. It's all good. Here's the thing. In terms of change, ideally, I think it would have to be abolished, but then that's going to take a lot, because it's going to need to, as we've said earlier, we're going to have to abolish the whole system. But if we're going to try and take incremental change, and I don't know if that will actually bring about full change, some of the things that are key that need to happen, in my opinion, are, one, if you were to look in terms of who are those that are employed within the policing systems, specifically in the predominant country, the bigger cities, a lot of the individuals that are actually policing in, say, for instance, Toronto, are people that are never even grown up in any type of multicultural context. And so a lot of the times when they're coming to work in cities like Toronto, this is the first time that they're ever being exposed to Black people. They need to start hiring individuals, or doing something to hire individuals that are actually from the context at which they are policing. Because when it's not, then it's easier for them to then look at some of the stereotypes that have been, subconsciously ingrained in them, and actually allow that to come out in the way that they police. I think a lot of the reasons why, these individuals act out in the way they are is ignorance. And it's not, I don't actually believe a lot of it is done initially in a malicious way. Just the ignorance of what they know of black people, or people from certain areas, or people who look a certain way. They act out in a certain way. So that needs to change. That's one thing. The other thing that needs to change is the way that they are taught and how to deal with certain situations. When they go into a situation, right now they go into situations saying it's like, we're at war. It's not always a situation where they need to be at war. They should be going to a situation trying to figure out how do they properly de-escalate the situation in a way that is not in a militant way. A lot of police individuals, or police officers, when they go into situations, they make it worse by the way in which they handle the situation. So proper training or reform in the training that is at hand right now needs to be changed. I think that a lot of the things that they do right now comes from the way that they handle situations back in the 1700s. We're not in the 1700s anymore. It's 2020. And so that the way culture is now is totally different from how it was back then. And so they need to change with the times and understand and how to deal with people. The last thing I would say in terms of the funding, or that concept of the funding, I am a believer of the funding if this is all we have in terms of an option, and where the funding needs to go to is some of the services that help to tackle the root causes of a lot of the issues that police officers end up having to deal with. And so mental illness is a huge thing, and so a lot more funding needs to go into addressing that. Education system and the lack of education, and because individuals have that lack of education, they just get to a place where it just seems as though they have no options in life, so they have to do certain things, and ultimately, then who comes in to capture them? It's the police. They wouldn't have to do that as much if they got to the root cause of what they are policing. And so, education system, mental illness, counseling, and things to help families that are coming from low income situations. If funding went into that, at least it would help to move the needle in a better direction. But I don't think it would totally eradicate all the issues that we have with the police. But those are some incremental changes that we can make that I think would go far.
And I would add to that statement, Reem. I think it's also recognizing that also every story is unique. Every moment that police officer walks in anything is unique.
Yeah.
So something we'll often hear is, well, the way that you deal with policing is you deal with fatherlessness in communities. You deal with, you deal with, people just kind of obeying the law, and that's how you deal with policing. And we can say yes, and it's not you're right. Police should do whatever they want, and there should be more fathers. It's yes, and are all of these things connected? Yes, they are. And those of you who are fans of the TV show, one of the greatest TV shows of all time, The Wire, you know that everything is connected. There's not one piece that is not connected to the other one. But often what I hear from police officers that I know is, well, it's the brokenness of the home, the brokenness of this and brokenness of that. If you are aware of these things, when you go into these moments, if you recognize that you're dealing with somebody who hasn't had that in your lives, then in that moment, for those couple of moments as you're de-escalating, you can actually be that person for that individual who is afraid, who is scared, who is acting out in anger because they may not know how else to be in that moment. You get to be that voice in their lives. I think of it this way, and then I'm gonna pass it over to Adam. We have police officers who, by way of their actions, are changing lives for the negative, and I mean that by not only in death but in areas of brutality. We're seeing that with protests all over the United States and people being beaten and being shot with rubber bullets. You're changing people's lives for the negative and for the worse, or you can be that moment where you change lives for the better. And I am going to quote again. I'm going to give an attaboy to my buddy Adam Hoskins, aka he plays basketball. My son and I, we watched all three of the Batman trilogy by Christopher Nolan. And at the end of The Dark Knight Rises, Commissioner Gordon says, people need to know who you are. Who are you? And Batman pretty well says, my life is this way because somebody put a jacket over my shoulders to let them know that everything was going to be okay. Everything was going to be okay in the world. And that police officer, Commissioner Gordon, puts a jacket on Bruce Wayne as a child, and that changes his perspective. Mm-hmm. You have an opportunity as a police officer to actually change someone's life for the better. And in doing that, you have the ability to then change the perception of police officers among their friends and their community, so on and so forth, because they're able to say, this one treated me with kindness.
Yeah, and before you go, Adam, just to quickly add to that, because here's the reality, and we haven't really talked about it. I know as a kid, for me, it was almost basically implied that police are not your friend. And because of the system and the way it is, my parents ingrained in me, anytime you're dealing with the police, know that they really are not your friend. And that's because of the system that's being created. Now, if they could do things to change that narrative, it would go a long way. And it goes into, there's a whole bunch of things that would go into that. Go ahead, Addy.
The philosopher Plato has this thing called
yes,
called the allegory of the cave, and what essentially he's talking.
That's a $2 word.
The allegory of the cave, in which there's two people, or there's people that are inside of this cave, and all they know is the cave, and so they conceptualize what life is like on the outside, and slowly one of them is getting closer to the light, and the light begins to hurt their eyes, and they're constantly being pulled, or at least tempted to go back into the cave, and I think that the way in which we're talking here kind of reminds me in terms of right now we do not consider abolishing the police because in a sense the light hurts our eyes. Like, we've been living in the cave, we've been brought up and bred in the cave for so long that we don't understand a society that does not have fundamentally police as first responders. And the thing is you talk about accountability for police officers. There's a myriad of things that are wrong with policing in Canada and America, but one of the fundamental things, we've spoken about here earlier in this thing that there's no accountability from the top. There is no national code as to how police departments operate. So there's nothing that a police department, if you were to start a county or sever county lines and say, okay, now this is a new district, and you have now a police unit that is going to be there. There is nothing from the national level that says that policing should be done this. All you have are the laws that are made, in which you have to interpret those laws. And what I'm saying in this is that when it's left to the police to interpret the laws of society, we see this with scripture. When it's left to man to interpret scripture, everybody gets it a different way, right? Everybody kind of sees it a different way and has their own interpretation. And what I'm saying in this is that the morality code of police officers in our day, because of their training, even good cops, even cops who have grown up in the neighborhood, even people who have been, who understand the streets from which they're with. The morality of their training has been so altered and shifted by the interpretation of what law and order means in their society that when they reach the streets, it's an us and them. The fact is that they see mental illness, they see criminals as they use this example of the sheepdog versus the wolves, and they're there to protect the sheep. But the problem is that they don't understand that the people who are criminals are also sheep, and that the goal for them is restoration, not incarceration. The goal for them is reconciliation back into society, not to shun them and to ostracize them. And this is, there's so many things that have to be torn down. But if we're talking about, practical things, right? Practical things that we can do, qualified immunity is a huge issue. Because you don a badge and a gun and you have 1,000 hours of training. Now you suddenly have immunity to the laws that you break when you're supposed to be enforcing those laws. Police officers should be personally liable for the decisions they make in the line of duty. We are all accountable in the roles that we play in society, to the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, to the governing powers that be. We're all accountable. Why are police officers not accountable for that? Just because they're there to enforce the law? Civil asset forfeiture. police departments make millions of dollars on seizure of property, of personal property.
Yep.
They can steal your stuff without charging you for a crime, and it makes the police departments very rich. Breaking the power of police unions. The police union is not a labor union. Okay, we have to understand this. Unions were formed because there were oppressed workers. There were workers who were marginalized, who were not paid. They were not paid fair wages, and so unions were formed so that they could leverage the power of the people to command fair wages for their work. But police officers are state agents. They're not their own. They're not their own. People unto themselves. They're not exploited workers. And then malpractice insurance. Listen, if a doctor nicks one of your intestines in surgery and stuff, you better believe that they're going to be liable for the things that they're doing on the table while you're on the table. Police officers should be liable for the things, and they should be from outside insurance things. You talk about an industry. Insurance is an industry unto itself. It's $1 billion industry. Why are police officers, why are they absconded from having insurance on what they do and how they conduct in the streets? Why do they not have to pay for the things that they do wrong? And then finally, defunding the police. It's starting like that. And we kind of act like, that there's nobody doing it. We have examples of that. And I'll tell you, I'll close with this. There's the city of Dallas. They essentially, they found themselves in 2017, the city of Dallas found themselves without cops, without, I guess, the necessary resources. And so what they started doing was that they would, instead of doing double police officers in cars, they would send a social worker, as well as a police officer and one other state agent. I can't remember what it was. But essentially, when they arrived on a scene, it was a threefold thing that when they arrived on a scene, the three of them would have to assess the situation. It was not just left up to one police officer, who, by the way, would only have required 1,000 hours of training. Some of that is combat training, not, you know what I mean? So when we look at, like, there's examples all around us. We just have to look and see, like, in terms of defunding the police. My ultimate goal, what I would say, is to abolish. But in order to reach that, we have to, like, there's got to be steps to be taken. And some of that is going to be defunding.
There's a lot of what you said there, which is 100% true. And I think in terms of change, we have to think in a little bit like how Calvin was talking, and maybe in between what was Calvin and what Stefan were saying. Yes, we are asking the police to do way too much. The scope is too large. We're asking them to behave in a way that is so regulated, in a sense that, well, you have to be here and you have to be here and you have to be here. At the same time, we also need to strip down the system if we want to rebuild the system. Unfortunately, in the world that we live in, the capitalistic type world that we live in, money is made everywhere. And when money plays a factor in things, that's why certain people are always in charge of, like, let's say in Toronto, the police services board. That's an appointed seat. And who appoints the person? The premier. So there's so many layers to it in terms of how do we actually construct change. I think we have to look at it in two things: high level things, low level things, macro and micro. For the low level things that need to get done right away, I think we need to disarm a lot of the police that happens. Because they are arriving with weapons, it escalates a situation, speaking exactly to what Kareem was saying, in the sense that we grow up, whether you're white or black, it's adversary, right? You're not seeing that police officer as your friend who's here going to solve your problem. And I would say in that regard, we have to look at it a little bit in terms of the UK. Now, not everything they do over there is correct, but at the same time, they don't have guns. They have people to go there and to solve problems, and they rely on CCTV. I know it's a whole other conversation in terms of surveillance, to basically say, listen, if you do a crime, we will find you. There's nowhere you're going to go that we can't find you. But in the sense that they now train their police officers different, and I think one stat I read was saying that they are trained in terms 3 times more hours for the same position, the equivalent positions that are happening inside of United States. So we have to look at a sense of, okay, how do we get people to now behave differently? I think it has to start with us. We have to behave differently in what we expect from our leadership, and they in turn need to reflect that, or you're going to be voted out. So if you're looking for people to behave different in communities, we need to invest more in that. And I think that's what was the beginning of this conversation, is defunding the police, rebuilding the police. We need to remove all of these incentives to have police officers be on, I don't want to say high horses, but on this pedestal where it says, no, we do need you. We do need order, but it needs to be systematic, and it needs to be in a different way than just brute force. It cannot be brute force, because eventually people will retaliate, and the way that they will retaliate will be with brute force. So the change needs to be systematic. We need to look how we organize and who is actually benefiting from these institutions, because that's a huge aspect of it, and that'll tell you a lot about the system. And we need to look at very simple things that we can do right now to fix it. But those things are both pie in the sky. I do agree with Calvin when he says you got to blow it up, and I don't think that will ever happen.
Yeah, like the blowing up, who knows? But the things that they can actually do right now. So, for example, we can take them and make the training longer. You know, my son put a post up, and I was like, before you put posts up, you got to check, make sure. So I check, you know, because we do that. So I checked it, and Germany, 2 years before you can become a police officer. Norway, 3 years. First and third year, you're actually doing in class. Second year, you're in the whatever field doing training. Finland, 3 years. UK, 4 years. And so you're
taking all of those, Adam, Andrew, all of those places, when you graduate, you do not get a gun.
Yes, exactly.
No gun.
And that's my point. So you're taking a long time training these guys, and then you're also saying there's no gun. Well, the other thing we need to do here, especially in Canada, which I don't understand why, is we need to have body cams. And there needs to be a punishment if your body cam is off.
Well, we can't defund the police and expect to spend money.
No, true.
You're right. So we got to start small first. And so they're not going to allocate the funds right now to different places. So we got to keep them accountable somehow.
I mean, why not take the money from all the tanks and all the assault rifles that they're buying? I mean, they're not fighting a war, right? They're protecting civilians. So I think the better option would be to actually fund it in another area, opposed to strapping up for Baghdad.
Oh, and I agree with you. I totally agree with you. However, we're like Bart, like Calvin has already said, some of these things aren't going to happen tomorrow, the next day. It might take 20, 30 years before we get to that point.
Well, that's very optimistic. 20, 30 years. That's optimistic.
So what can we do now? And those are some of the things that we can do now. Like we said, as we're talking here, we don't hate police officers.
No, we don't
hate police
the ones
officers.
Who do it well.
And we want them to do it well. We want them to do it properly. We want them to be set up the way that they should be set up. And that is to help serve and protect community.
Obviously, we have made an episode out of a segment, ladies and gentlemen.
That's true.
And there's way more that we could talk about when it comes to this topic, and we have a long summer ahead of us, and this topic is not going to go away. This topic is going to be in the news for a long period of time as voting happens. There's a small little election that is taking place in the United States of America in November of this year. And so these sort of topics are going to come up more and more, especially, unfortunately, as more areas of shootings and brutality, unfortunately, as those things continue to come up, these conversations are going to happen. It's important to remember a couple things. One, this is not a white thing versus a black thing. This is not a color thing. This is about regulation of a department that speaks so deeply into our society. It's valuable to know that this is not about black, white cops or whatever else. It's about people being treated fairly, and the idea of reform or defunding or abolishing, maybe it's just these words that we're picking that are really problematic for us. I don't know. What we're going to do also in the bio for this episode, there's an article that just came out in Huffington Post that says implicit bias training does not actually change police behavior.
No.
So there's got to be some conversations about what's being trained, how they're being trained, and how long they're being trained, because what's actually being done in certain places of the United States and in Canada is not actually changing how certain
Oh, no.
police officers
That's a joke.
actually
It looks in my attorney.
thank you, Stefan. It doesn't actually change how these people are being viewed. If you are, so maybe you have thoughts on this. Maybe you agree with some of the things that the guy said. Maybe you didn't. Leave a comment in this, in whether it's part 1 or part 2. Not sure if we're gonna cut this in half. Leave a comment. If you're a police officer and you happen to be a fan of our show, or you're a police officer and you're not a fan of our show, explain it to us from where you sit. Let us know what this looks like and feels like for you. Let us know the pressures that you're experiencing so that we can have a better understanding of where it's coming from your end, so we can have dialogue together. One of the ways that we can bring change is if we continue to talk about the issue all the time.
Yeah.
This has been the House of Common Show.